Hello, everybody. This again, not an official Making Records episode. This is a follow-up to the UnFairchild Shootout 2023 video. And this one is going to be just a whole lot of talking. There's not even going to be even any like audio comparisons in this one. So if that's what you're here for, you can skip this one. But if your idea of a great time is listening to two nerds argue about design choices on a Fairchild recreation, well, then this is your lucky day, because that's what's about to happen. So if you hadn't noticed on the other video, Peter Rodriguez from Heritage Audio chimed in with a bunch of comments in the comment section on the video. It was great to have him do that, because now we can hear both sides of this. It's really ultimately great for everybody out there that might be considering one of these. Man, after all of this, anybody that's considering these two devices, you will be able to make the most informed purchase decision ever in the history of Fairchild recreations. So as we get into this, like I put this video out there, obviously waving the undertone flag, trying to talk about why I think our choices are super duper awesome and maybe better than choices that Heritage made with theirs. And so I'm kind of poking at them a little bit. And so then Peter, responded with a bunch of comments. He's poking back at me. I would do the same thing, And so I totally respect that, invite him to chime in and give his side of this, It's important to hear both sides. And I thought it would be better to just do another video for this, because instead of having this all buried in the comments of the video, some people may have missed this. And, this way I can actually bring all of his comments out, and there's a better chance of everybody hearing his side of this and then be able to respond to them. I prefer talking than typing anyway, so it's easier for me. So here we go. Let's dive in. Peter starts by saying, "Thank you very much, Eric, for taking the time to test our Hairchild 660. It sounds great in your skilled hands and ears. Actually, both units sound great. Although we really appreciate you as an incredible, talented engineer and producer, it looks like electronics engineering is not one of your skills, and someone else designed this unit for you, which is totally fine. Due to this fact, there are some technical aspects of your speech that not only are not accurate, but actually the opposite is true. Let me briefly go through them." So before I go into all the points, first, I will be the first person to say I am not an electrical engineer. I don't hold that degree. Whatever knowledge or experience I've accumulated in my travels, they're definitely more in the audio engineer realm, as in somebody that uses this stuff. And a little bit of electrical engineering knowledge that I might have, I've picked up from Larry along the way. It's probably like 90% audio engineer and 10% electrical engineer at best, So I make no claim to that at all. And, I'm kind of one of those people where it's like, at times I know just enough to get myself into trouble. I've been known to put my electrical engineer foot right in my mouth. But even with that, I think this particular comment is more just a misunderstanding and a difference of context. So let me see if I can clear all that up and we can all kind of understand what we're talking about here. So Peter says, you state that using the new old stock 6BA6 Varimu tube is a problem because as double the number of tubes is needed, heat dissipated is double. In fact, the opposite is true. As you are undoubtedly aware, the main issue with the original Fairchild is the high plate power dissipation in the 6386 tubes, very close or even exceeding the actual rate of the tubes, which means literally that those tubes are frying and a yearly $1,500 retubing process is mandatory. With the 6BA6, as there is only one triode per bottle, The maximum plate dissipation is much higher, actually double, and the life expectancy is way higher, not to mention that retubing the unit will cost a tenth. Okay, there's a lot being said in there that I want to try and comment on, but first I have to kind of clarify what I think the misunderstanding is and the difference in context. So what Peter is talking about is the heat being dissipated from the plates in these tubes. And what I'm talking about is the heat being dissipated from the heaters in these tubes. And I would think that when I said it doubles the amount of current that you need for the heater for those tubes in the circuit. It's a dead giveaway that I'm talking about the heater, but somehow that got confused. So Peter's talking about plates, I'm talking about heaters. They both are dissipating heat inside the bottle, as you call it. And so that was, I think, the fundamental misunderstanding in there. And then he, I think, is taking this into a different context. It's actually a little bit vague in how this is written. Double the number of tubes is needed. And you're saying that with double the number of tubes, that it's actually the opposite, that the heat would be cut in half, which I don't think makes sense. I'm going to try and just clear all this up here. He is correct when he says the heat being dissipated from the plate is half in the 6BA6 versus the 6386. And that is when you're comparing one 6BA6 to one 6386. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what happens when you take 8 6386s out of this box and replace them with 16 6BA6s. So now you have two 6BA6s for every one 6386. And so in that context, which is what I was talking about, the heat being dissipated from the plates is roughly the same, because you're going to have 16 plates in both instances. Whereas the heaters are pretty much the same in both of them. They each have a current rating and it's very close between the two. And so when you have 16 of the 6BA6 tubes versus 8 of the 6386 tubes, then the heat coming from the heaters roughly doubles. That's what I was talking about. So I think that pretty much clears up the context and misunderstanding part of it. Admittedly, my explanation could have been clearer. I think, I started by trying to specify the heater, but in the end, I probably should have said the heat from the heaters doubles in the Varimu tubes, and specified that. I could have even excluded, the plates. The heat from the plates is a wash. That ends up basically staying the same. So there you go. So then there's some other stuff in here that he says that's also good to know. So he's talking about the difference in this power dissipation and that the tubes are frying, and this was an issue with the original Fairchild. Because they had this very high plate voltage, I believe it was 250 volts, and it's the absolute maximum that those 6386 tubes are designed to take, and so it does stress them, and they would not have a long expected lifespan. Back then, I would be surprised if the 6386 tube cost more than $1, and so it probably wasn't that big deal, probably the equivalent of $10 by, with inflation now. So it's like $80 a year, to replace those tubes. So I think an acceptable cost, for how they designed that thing was probably, reasonable at the time. And when we were designing the Mark II UnFairchild, we just simply lowered the plate voltage a bit to make sure that they would be at a comfortable temperature and, have a much longer life. We had different ways of addressing that issue. He went to a tube that you need 16 of, and we used the JJs and just lowered the plate voltage. When we did that, I did a huge round of testing to make sure that the UnFairchild will still perform the same as an original Fairchild, even after changing that plate voltage. It's spec'd out the same amount of headroom, same amount of harmonic distortion, same frequency response. I was like, all right, cool, here we go. We can do this, these tubes will be happy, and this is all going to work. So then Okay, yeah, so that's the life expectancy part. And then he also says, not to mention that retubing the unit will cost a tenth. I'm going to actually include that in a part later on because it sort of fits into another part of this better. So I'll come back to the cost of the tubes thing of what he's saying there. So you go on saying that because 6386s have two triodes in the same bottle, matching is easier. Again, the opposite is exactly true. As JJ 6386 triodes in the same bottle are often poorly matched, and there is no way to remedy this, as JJ won't take any responsibility. This is a big issue during production, as I'm sure you have experienced, but is a much bigger one if a customer needs to service a unit, as replacing one single defective tube won't be enough. Poorly matched 6386s can't simply be used, and this and the sound quality factor made us discard their use at a very early stage. You will never have this problem with 6BA6s. We use our own test jigs to match tubes down to plus minus 0.2 dB in the 0 to 20 dB range of compression. Okay, so for this, I'm just going to kind of talk about the whole tube thing in general. There's a bunch of stuff in there to unpack, and I'm going to try and make sure that I remember all of it as I go through this. I think I want to just quickly touch on this issue about the two triodes being in one bottle versus one triode being in a bottle, and that question about how well they match up. And so, I was saying that it makes sense to me that the two triodes in a single bottle have a better chance to match up together because they were made in the same process, and Peter's point is that if they're in separate bottles, then you can manually match them, and that's true. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to do the manual matching of the two triodes, then you really have to start paying attention to some details. Like, first of all, you can't just go and randomly grab, a bunch of 6BA6s from all over the place and think that they're going to match closely, because if they're different manufacturers or made in different years or different batches, I would say that it's way more likely that those 6BA6s would mismatch than the two triodes that were made in the same process inside one bottle. It makes sense to me. I double-checked that with Larry. We talked about it. I trust him with all this stuff, and he agrees that makes sense. So that's that part. So now we can get into the whole matching process part of this. And the cool thing about this is we start to get into some real-world, actual data on this that makes it, much more meaningful, instead of just either I or Peter, saying what we think or whatever. So, okay, so first there's the matching part of this. So he is questioning that I'm saying that the matching is easier. Okay, so let me just address that part of it. So with the 6BA6, you have to, they built their own test jig, so you may have to either learn how to use a tube tester or build your own test jig, and presumably you load a bunch of tubes in there and test them and see if they match. If they don't, you have to swap things out or whatever. It's a process of some sort. Okay, so then this is our matching process for the JJ 6386s, and it's so simple the way this turned out. So the JJ tubes, they test them all themselves at JJ, and they all come with test results. And so they test them under 8 different conditions that would represent different degrees of compression. So you can see how they track, through a range of compression. And so initially, when we were first getting them, each tube would come with a little sheet that has this, printout in it that has this tube test data. And then we realized, wow, we could just use this data. All the information is in there to be able to match these tubes. And so I contacted them and said, hey, can you just send us a spreadsheet? Because presumably you have all this info in a computer somewhere. Just send us a spreadsheet that has all of that test data for that order of tubes. You know, we would order these tubes sometimes 200, 400 at a time, you know. And so they would do that. They would send us an Excel spreadsheet that has all of that tube test data in there. And then it was Ian McGregor from Standard Audio who came up with this. He's brilliant. He's nice enough to work with us sometimes and work on our products when he's not making amazing stuff for Standard Audio. And so he came up with this way to import all of the data from the JJ spreadsheet into a spreadsheet that he made that would automatically sort these into matched sets. And so you literally, our matching process for 200, 400, doesn't matter how many tubes, is literally importing the data and hitting sort. That's how we match the tubes. Because all the test data is already there. It's super easy. And so I think it's fair to say that our matching process is definitely easier. So then there's a question of how well are they matched, okay? And so this is where some of this like real world data can come in. And so, you know, we have been building UnFairchilds since, I don't know what, late 2016 is when they first came out, or the Mark II came out. In that time, so now we're into the 500s now. And so we have purchased, matched, tested, and put out into the world at least 4,000 JJ6386s. So I would be surprised if there's anybody out there that has more experience with these tubes than we do. We really know what's going on with these tubes at this point. And so this is real world data. Okay, so we have a test process for the UnFairchilds, and we also our goal is to have the compression track really well all the way down into 20 dB of compression and sound great. You know, an important part of our test process is to actually listen to the compressor compressing something. And we have like an example file to listen to, and it's like when you're set this way on this, and it's the same drum loop that I used in the example. We use that as part of our test process. It should sound like this, you know. And so I wanted to find out, you know, in this most recent batch, we're in a batch of like 25 UnFairchilds that are being finished up right now. And how did the matching go? And so, you know, we typically will buy tubes in batches, you know, like either 200 or 400, and we buy a little bit extra. So we have extra tubes to swap ones out if we need to for the matching process. Once we actually test the tubes, because they're all matched with the spreadsheet, and then they get put in units, and then we test them and listen to them. And we also will have some extras just in case we have issues down the road or whatever, 2, 3, 5 years from now, we'll have extras on the shelf. We can, you know, help people out if they need it. So in this last batch of 25 units, I called our contract manufacturer and said, I want to know when you put all of the matched sets into these 25 units, how many times did you have to swap out a tube because it didn't pass our test? And so they went through, they keep track of all of this stuff very carefully, and they only had to swap out a tube one time. So out of 200 tubes, you know, 199 of them matched up great when matched with our spreadsheet, and we only had to swap out one tube to get it to pass our testing. And this sort of speaks to another comment that Peter made, that you would not be able to replace one tube in a matched set. And That just has not been our experience, just like the example I just gave of all these 25 units that only needed to have one tube replaced. We just pulled out the tube that was being fussy and replaced it with another one, calibrated it up, sounded great, good to go. And the same has happened, if we have a user that's having an issue with a tube, we have a guide for the users so they can identify the tube that's being fussy, because typically it's usually just one tube that's being problematic. So they can figure that out. We send out a replacement tube, they can put it in, calibrate it up themselves, and sounds great, good to go. So that has really been our experience. The vast majority of the time, you can swap out a tube, and it's not really this big problem. I think that's really coming from a place of not having real world experience with these tubes. So there it is. That's how it goes for us. And so then there's the question about, are these really matched well enough for it to sound good? Hey, you said it yourself at the beginning. Both units sound great. And I agree. They both sound great. We got at least 500 people out there using UnFairchilds that love the sound of them. I love the sound of them. I use them every day. And the matching is just not been a problem. So that's the real world with the JJ6386s. That is what's actually happening with those tubes, with us making these things for almost 7 years, using 4,000 of these tubes. That's how it goes, for real. That's how it goes. Okay, so now let's look at the other side of it. So we have some real world information that came in. That's what I love about YouTube. It goes out to in the world. A bunch of people can check this out, and they can, share their experiences with it. And so there's a person named, I believe, Jason Anderson. Is that who it was? Yeah, Jason Anderson, that chimed in with his experience with 6BA6s. So he presumably has one of these units that uses them. I don't know if it's a Fairchild or something else or whatever. And so he said that there's plenty of new old stock Tesla 63 F1 Soviet valves that are 6BA6 equivalent out there. I tested about 150 and got 3 exact matching sets. Okay, so those are the numbers that are going on in the real world with those tubes. So this is a person that actually took on that task of getting a bunch of these tubes, matching them up, getting them so they're matched super great, and putting them in a Fairchild type compressor of some sort. And so to get one matched set of 16 tubes, he went through 50 of these 6BA6s. That is just a completely different ballgame with how you have to approach matching up these tubes. In our case, we only ended up having to have one extra tube out of 200 in order to get our 25 fully functioning UnFairchilds. This gentleman had to buy 150 of these tubes in order to get 3 match sets of 16 tubes. That's 48 tubes. So, that's a 3-to-1 overage that he had to buy in order to get his tubes. And we have a percentage of overage that we buy as well, like I was saying. And there was a certain point along the way where we accumulated enough that weren't getting used that we ended up matching them up and selling them off to users, making available to users out there. If they wanted to have a backup set on hand, they could just have a set that was matched by us. So I don't know what else to say about it. That's just the real world experience that is coming in here. So, and I think there was Peter ended up responding to Jason Anderson's post, and he sort of summed up most of it, sort of repeating what he said before, and he says speculating this type of comparative advertising videos is probably not a good idea. I think guessing and speculating is fine as long as you're not, trying to present them as facts. I usually say when I'm guessing, I say I would guess blah, blah, blah. I think that's okay. And it says, your reply above is very intriguing, especially when your explanation on JJ6386's matching fully contradicts what you forcefully state in the video. I don't know. I feel like I've been pretty consistent with this. I've never said that they match perfectly. I only say that they match well enough to sound great. So yeah, I'm not sure what the contradiction is there. I think I've been pretty consistent with that. Okay, and then he sort of says the same thing here. 6 are easily pared down to 20 dB of compression at plus or minus 2.2 dB for two reasons. A, we have so many to choose from, and B, both triodes are bottled independently. So he's sort of reiterating the same thing that he said before. And so again, I think this sort of reinforces the reality that you need a lot of these tubes. He's saying it himself. We can get great matches because we have so many to choose from, maybe 50 for every set of 16 that you need, that you can get really great match sets. And that is the benefit of the 6BA6 side of things, is that for, based on however many tubes you want to go through and however much time you want to take matching them, I'm sure you can get tubes where the sides are matched more exactly between the two sides of each triode. And then it really boils down to the question of, like, how perfectly matched do these things really need to be to have a great sounding compressor? And my take is that the UnFairchild sounds great. Peter said it as well. Both units sound great, and our matching process is laughably simple and requires almost no swapping of tubes, and it's working great. So I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. And so then, there was a point earlier about the cost of these tubes. He's saying that it would cost 1/10. If one of these units is burning through tubes every year, it would cost $1,500 to replace tubes every year, and that the 6BA6s would cost 1/10. So if he's talking about 16 tubes, so that's about $10 a tube. And if you look around on the various sort of tube suppliers that are available to person on the street, like Tube Depot, the Tube Store, Antique Electronics, places like that, just, online tube places. That's about roughly what they're going for at this point, about $10 a piece. But I think the reality is based on Jason Anderson's real world experience and what is being indicated with we have so many tubes to choose from, is you got to go through a lot more than 16 to get there. And so if tubes are costing $10 a piece and you need 50 of them, it's really more like $500 to get a set of matched tubes. And so this actually speaks to one of the speculations that I did in the first video, where I was making just sort of a wild guess about how many tubes you might need in order to get a matched set of 16 6BA6s. And I didn't want to be like overly pessimistic about it, to have it sound like I'm just trying to like badmouth the 6BA6 tubes. And so my guess was 20 tubes for every matched set of 16. And it turns out, based on Jason Anderson's experience, that was a very optimistic, guess. And his real world experience is more like 50 for every set of 16. And so then, the calculation that I did then, let's say over the next 2 or 3 years between all of these companies, you sell 1,000 of these units out there. And so that's potentially 50,000 of these tubes, And we all took economics in high school or at some point. We all know how that works, like the price of these tubes is gonna go up for sure. And if you need 50 of them to get a match set of 16, it's gonna get real expensive real fast. Peter addresses that sort of later on, so we'll get into the next bit here as well. So he goes on to say, you try to insinuate that customers buying our units are at risk because we will eventually run out of new old stock tubes and the investment will be lost. And And then he says in parentheses, I guess the same applies for a U47, M49, U67, etc. buyers in your opinion, and buyers of the UnFairchild 670 Mark I, by the way. And then he says, again, the opposite is true. So what he's trying to say here is that the tubes are are becoming very rare or difficult to get for those microphones, yet they're still very valuable. And that's totally true. So if you were going to buy one of those microphones as an investment, go for it. If you're going to buy one of those microphones as something you want to use in your studio every single day, it's something to think about. I don't know if you checked recently how much a VF14 tube is, the one that goes in U47. I just took a peek. I hadn't looked in a while. On eBay, a new old stock VF14, $5,000. That is just insane. Similar, not quite as severe for the M49. It uses an AC 701. Those are going for around $2,000. And at that price point, you really got to trust the person that you're buying it from, that this is truly a new old stock tube. It would be very tempting to try and sell it as that, even when it might not be. I stand by it. Like with those things, it's just, it has its own set of risks when you're dealing with that new old stock stuff that's not being made anymore. And I think it does apply to those microphones. I don't know why the U67 is in there, because that tube's still being made, but whatever. Okay, so Peter sort of explains more their circumstance. He says, we secured tubes for a lifetime. Customers can obtain a tube set at cost within the first 2 years of purchase, and military tubes are fantastic. With 6386s, you are at the mercy of the JJ company, and if they decide to stop making the tube, your unit will be the anchor boat, or boat anchor is probably what he meant. And I sincerely hope this will never be the case. Our customers can get a full set of 22 extra tubes when purchasing the unit at cost. Of course, eventually, new old stock tube supply will disappear, JJ Factory will close, and the Earth will collapse against the sun, but that's another matter. I love the astronomy reference in there. I always enjoy that. And so, I think he's laying it out there. It's a choice that you have to make, and everybody is going to have an opinion of what they really feel the most comfortable with, I truly feel like the JJ 6386s are working great. They're like any component. They're not perfect. I wish we could make audio equipment out of things that were perfect, but that's not the way it works. That's why we have customer service, and we buy little overages and all that stuff. All these parts, have performance specs and tolerances to them. They'll never be perfect, and we just have to do our best to make the best choice about what's going to really get the results that we want over time. So for the heritage users out there, I hope there is a lifetime of tubes available for y'all, and you'll be happy with that thing as long as Heritage is there to sell them to you. But of course, anything can happen. Whatever, the JJ Factory could get bombed, Heritage could go out of business. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? You just got to put your chips down wherever it feels best and go for it, dive in, and whatever you're into, go for it. Okay, so then he says, more tube stuff. It is interesting that you defend the JJ 6386's tube as the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is in quotes, and I'm taking that as he is quoting me saying that. Whenever I'm quoted, I like to make sure that I really said that. I can't find where I said that. I definitely didn't say it in the first video. I checked I didn't say it in our manual. I didn't say it on our website. I actually went to Google and typed in Eric Valentine Holy Grail 6386 to see if anything would come up. The only thing that came up was the comments for the first video. So I don't remember saying that, but all I can say is that the 6386s are really working great for the UnFairchild, and I have no regrets about making that choice and deciding, to make that change, which is kind of leads us into the next part of this. So, because the original UnFairchild, as I said in the first video, did not use 6386s, it used 6BC8s. So his next comment is, so I sort of split this sentence so I could comment along the way. Defend the 6386s as the Holy Grail and the way to go, whilst the original UnFairchild Mark I did not use them in favor of new old stock tubes. We concur with your former opinion on this, though. New old stock tubes are far superior than JJ 6386s. So he's trying to say that initially we had made the choice and the judgment that new old stock tubes are the better way to go, and then changed to the JJ 6386s, and he's saying, like, you were right about the new old stock ones. So Peter doesn't have the benefit of knowing sort of the timing of how that all played out. So I'll explain that. It'll clear this up. So when we made those original Mark I UnFairchilds, the JJ 6386 tubes were not available. They hadn't even announced them yet. I didn't know they were even coming. And through that process of building those first units, and then ultimately having to get, and I bought, like I said, thousands of the 6BC8s, and trying to get all the matched sets for those in those first 10 units and get ones that weren't noisy or didn't match up right or whatever. In that process, towards the end, I was like, whoa, this is not easy. Trying to get all these tubes these old tubes to work. And after we finished that batch of tubes, like right around the same time, JJ announced the 6386s, and I was just like, darn it. Like I would have definitely used them. And it all kind of came crashing in at the same time, the announcement of the JJ ones and the experience of trying to get, the 6BC8s to work. And I think it was probably kind of a similar thing. We had to go through, to get a match set of 8 of those tubes. We were going through like 20 or 30 of those tubes, to try and do it. And I was like, whoa. This is a lot, And so after making that run of Mark I mean, immediately at the end of that process, I was like, absolutely not. This is not sustainable, and it won't be supportable beyond this run. We got to save all the tubes we have to make sure we can keep these people happy with their Mark Is, and we're not making a single another one of these things, and we'll get those out to these people, they'll have them, and we're immediately going to switch the whole thing over to 6386s. And so how many of those we made before I made that determination? 10. There is only 10 UnFairchild Mark Is out in the world that we sold to people, because I just knew it wasn't going to work. There was no way. And so now, with the JJ 6386s, we are almost 7 years down the road. They're working great. They test out great. We got a little spreadsheet that matches them for us. We throw them in there. The honest truth is if those JJ 6386s were available before I started making the Mark I would have 100% used them. Absolutely, for sure. And I would have never chose the new old stock ones. So I just didn't have any choice. Okay, so now we get to the next bit. So now this is, he says, you go further and spread a list of features that the Hairchild is missing. Firstly, none of those features are present on the Fairchild 670. So this is another thing where he's using quotes on the word missing. And so again, if I'm being quoted, I want to make sure that I really said that. And so I went back and watched this part of the video. It turns out what I said was that I've always thought the original Fairchild was missing these features. It always was missing these features. That's why I never bought one. It's like, I can't imagine paying so much money for a compressor that doesn't have these features. The original Fairchild, I think, is missing these features. And then when I get into the list at the beginning of, like when I start listing all these things that we added, I say, these are all the things that I can't imagine why you would leave these out. So that's what I say there. And then at the end of the list, I say, so that is the rundown of all the things that you don't get in any of these other ones. So, you know, I didn't actually say I didn't say that the Hairchild is missing these features, but all the same, I get your point. Your point is that it doesn't make sense to say that a copy of something is missing a feature if the original didn't have it in the first place. So that's your point, and I get that. That's not what I was trying to say. My point is that I always thought the original Fairchild should have had them and is missing those features. And, you know, when you make a recreation of it, like, what a great opportunity to add them. And, you know, so there you go. Okay, so then he continues and he says, and to be honest, the added features are not that interesting, in our humble opinion. We appreciate your creativity when designing your unit, but our criteria was to simply recreate the legendary sound of the original. Okay, so, you know, at the beginning of this, I talked a little bit about how, like, you know, I put this comparison, I was poking at him and he's poking back at me. And so just brace yourselves. This is going to be kind of the pokiest part of this particular video. So I hope that everybody can take this in the spirit that it's intended. This is supposed to be just kind of spirit of playful competition. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at the faceplate of an original Fairchild and the Hairchild. All right, so we've got the metering selector, balance, zero balance. That looks like it's the same. There's an input gain. Yep, same thing there. And then left the threshold control. That's the same. There's a DC threshold over here, but that's just hanging out down here. So that's on both of them. And then we get this AGC control. And no, there's something different here. Okay, let's take a look at that. Okay, so this one only has two positions, a left-right mode and a lateral-vertical mode, which is essentially the same as MS. And then the Hairchild has four selections here. It has an individual mode, a link mode, a lateral-vertical mode, which is basically MS, and then this lateral-vertical link mode. So there's now two new selections here that aren't on the original Fairchild, and this looks very, very familiar to me. I know I've seen this somewhere before. Oh, that's right. It's exactly the same as the UnFairchild. So it seems that you found these added features interesting because you put the exact same thing on your box. And I would say an excellent choice. These are really great features to have. The thing that's kind of ironic about the original Fairchild is that left-right mode on that thing. For some reason, when I first was getting exposed to Fairchild, I always assumed that that was like a stereo link mode. It's a stereo box. It's actually not. It's like the individual mode. They never had a stereo linked mode on the original stereo Fairchild 670. You know, that's one of those things where I would say that's a missing feature on that original box. And so we both added that, a stereo link mode. The individual ends up being the same as the original Fairchild's left-right mode. So then, you know, we called ours MS, but it's the same thing as lateral-vertical. So we both have the lateral-vertical or MS mode. And then there's this MS link mode, and you're just calling it lateral-vertical. It's the same thing as the MS link mode. And the MS link mode is a really cool thing to have. That is something that never existed before. We were the first people to ever put that on there. I've never seen it on any other compressor, and it was actually Larry's idea to do it. And so it first showed up in the universe on, you know, around late 2016, early 2017 when we released the UnFairchild Mark II. And there's some really cool stuff that you can do with it. So the MS mode is cool by itself, but what ends up happening is that the mono information in the mix and the stereo information in the mix are being compressed individually, right? They're not linked together. And when you change the level balance between those two things, your stereo image starts to fluctuate. It gets wider or narrower. And so it was a thing that was a little weird for me when I was using MS modes. I've actually come to like it a little more. Now I've been using it more and just letting it just kind of fly around. It's actually kind of cool. But the MS link mode allows you to anchor the stereo width. So you can use the UnFairchild, or now the Hairchild, as an MS processing device. And so when you put your mix through there, you get some compression going. And if you just simply turn up the channel B, so there's more level on, you know, this lower channel, then it widens the mix, and it will stay wide because they are linked together, and you won't get it going like this, you know. So it's a really cool feature to add. Again, I think it's an excellent choice to put it on your box. Hopefully people will think that's funny or fun, or I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go over, but I thought it was funny. I mean, you kind of handed me that one. So I couldn't resist. So this next part is kind of related to this. It's not really a feature set thing, but you know, you'll see why I'm doing this. Okay, so anybody that has taken on the challenge of recreating a Fairchild circuit, they've all had to deal with this one mountain to climb, which is the control amp. I would say that the control amp on the original Fairchild is not great. It is just a clumsy, inefficient, you know, expensive design to try and have to recreate. And there's so many ways to do it that are so much more efficient, easier, probably more reliable, take up less current, you know, like there's a lot of things about it that were just like, wow, really? That's how you got to do it. And so everybody's had to kind of choose how to do that. And I'm very curious to see what this new Fairchild, the ones that are really trying to be purist about it, like how much they're going to commit to that, because man, that is a big commitment to take on to try and recreate that control amp. Boy, it's just not a great design. So, you know, so a lot of people have altered that part of it. I was snooping around a little bit, just kind of looking at different choices people made. PalmChild, they went the solid state approach, so they have no tubes in theirs. Stam went one step further, so it's mostly solid state, but he put one tube in there to just kind of preserve the tubiness, the tube quality in the, you know, control amp. And then let's see what Heritage did. So here is the back of the Hairchild. And so here's the like 8, you know, 6B86s. You can see them, they're labeled there, that you need for one of the channels. And then, so then here is the control amp for that channel. And so it looks like they got 3 tubes here. There's an ECC 83, an ECC 81, and an ECC 99. And I know I've seen this before. This looks really familiar. Oh yeah, that's right. It's exactly the same 3 tubes we use in the UnFairchild. There they are. The ECC 83, the ECC 81, and the ECC 99. I would say again, an excellent choice. They've been working great for us. And I thought it really did capture what was important about the original control amp, which was a very tube-centric design, and really, you know, streamlined it a lot and still incorporated the tube. So, so yeah, I think that works great. Great choice. Okay, so now we go on, and it says, you can get a slow attack and fast release with almost any compressor nowadays without having to spend nowhere near 10 grand. It was a great technical achievement at the time to be able to get the fast attack this 670 has, and that is the sound it is renowned for. This one was funny to me because our opinions about this could not be more opposite. So he's saying that you shouldn't have to spend 10 grand to be able to have a slow attack and a fast release. And I'm saying if you spend 10 grand on a compressor, it better have a way to have a slow attack and fast release. Like, I don't know, it's just insane to me, you know? And it's like, sure, there's a million other options out there of compressors that have adjustable attack and release. There's plugins and, you know, solid state ones and all that stuff, but they don't sound like a Fairchild. And that's what I thought was really, really cool about adding this, to be able to have the sound of a Fairchild and have that adjustability is huge. And, you know, like, I think this really starts to get at the heart of the difference in what really motivates the design approach between Undertone and Heritage. You know, Heritage has an amazing collection of recreations that they've done. They've got they got way more products than we do. And, and it seems like they really stick to this thing of like, we're going to make a thing that's just like the original thing. And there's a really great argument for that. Certainly the marketing is way easier because you're making a thing that people already know and have a familiarity with, and all you have to do is say like, hey, we made a thing and it's just like this thing that everybody already kind of knows about and loves and has like this sort of time-tested reputation, you know, and so it's great for the marketing part of it. And, you know, on our side, it's like our designs are driven by more real-world use because I'm a dude that's in a room every day in the trenches trying to get real results and deliver them to artists and record companies. And I think it's hard to appreciate how important some of this stuff is. And it's very easy to be dismissive and say things like, these aren't very interesting to us. Because if you haven't been in this seat, sitting in front of the speakers, trying to get something done, and it's like, you put a Fairchild on your drums, and it's like, oh my God, I love what that does to the texture of the drums, but there's no way I can use this if I can't slow down the attack. It'll never actually sit in the mix right. If you haven't been in that position over and over in all these different sort of incarnations of it, it's really hard to understand how important these things really are. And they're really important. I mean, for me, they make all the difference. You know, it's like all of a sudden I can take the amazing sound of a Fairchild circuit and I can use it just about anywhere I want to put it. Drums, vocals, guitars, whole mix, percussion, like anything, I can find a setting on there that's going to sound beautiful and musical and flattering, you know. And that's really, I think that's just sort of the difference in it, you know. It's more of like an electrical engineer approach as opposed to an audio engineer approach that really drives our design approaches. So, you know, it's just different ways of doing it. Okay, so then the next thing here is, on another side, our unit has all the gain calibration points you state it doesn't have. I'm happy to hear that those are in there. Only that they are on the inside of the unit. We wonder why a final user being able to misalign the unit is a desired feature. And again, we just have very opposite feelings about this. It seems we have more confidence in our users than you do yours. So, you know, for me, it's like, I like making this stuff available to our users and empower them to really be able to get what they want out of this unit. And I would say that the combination of having the additional features and the ability to calibrate it to have different sounds and textures and stuff really just makes it vastly more versatile of a device. And, you know, if somebody gets lost in the calibration somewhere, we are a phone call away, and when you call, you get the wonderful and lovely Bradley Cook on the phone, who is not only probably the world's expert on calibrating UnFairchilds at this point, he also happens to be a total badass Grammy-nominated engineer, mixer, producer. So, you know, again, it's just like that same sort of difference where, you know, Brad is a real world engineer and is still going in and engineering and recording stuff every day. He knows how to speak that language. So when people call, you're talking to somebody that uses this stuff every day and knows how it's used and speaks that language, and can help guide you through it, very easily. If you do need help, we have, written guides that are easy to follow. And it's never been a problem for us. Occasionally we'll get a call with somebody that's gotten lost in the calibration, but it's easy to straighten them out, and you get the benefit of having all of those options and control and being empowered to get what you want out of that device. So just a difference of opinion. So then his last comment was, lastly, we simply welcome competition. It is in the sole interest of customers to be able to access so many great products from different manufacturers. You made your recreation, we did ours. We congratulate you for this and wish you the best in the pro audio manufacturing business. Thank you for that. We wish you the best as well. And I'm trying to do this, in just like a lighthearted spirit of competition, and make available just the information about what the different choices are. And, Peter and I, we exchanged some emails directly about this. And I think the one thing that he is really uncomfortable with that was in the last video is my speculation about the rumor that about us not making Fairchilds anymore. And so I don't want any of this to cause problems for anybody. And so I get that. If that speculation has caused any problems for you, I apologize. In the email, he indicated they had nothing to do with it. I will take you at your word. Case closed. And we can all move on. So I think with that, I can't imagine I have anything else to say about Fairchild recreation design choices. I'm going to let Peter have the last word if he would like to. I'm going to try and be done with this video. And so, you are welcome to respond to whatever I've said in this video with comments in the comments section. And let's just let it be that. And we can all get back to doing what we do, trying to make awesome audio equipment or make records or whatever we do. All right, so there you go. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. All right, bye.